G'day guys, in this video I'm just going to show you how I made my bike rack and how you can make one as well. Now as you can see, you can do it in a vise. It's not as glamorous, but it will get the job done. And once you weld those two together, you can just bash it around with a hammer and straighten it out as you need. Alright, as soon as I finished painting these, I let them dry overnight, and then the next day I assembled it all and I went straight to Mystic Park. Now, I didn't get to film the assembly of it, so things are a bit dirty, they're a bit scratched up now, but I'm going to show you how it all goes together, and then we will jump into some measurements and some more specifics. But for now, I'll show you how it all bolts together, how it looks installed, and then we'll take the rest from there. Now this is our first piece, that'll go in the hitch. I've already pre-bolted the brackets together. Next we just have this upright. Now next is this main piece. Now last is this spreader that goes across the bottom. Now there is a flat metal plate, and that'll sandwich this onto the vertical upright, and then we can adjust our height to suit. Now I've just got some paracord here. Now I could have made this vertical section shorter by about 130 mil. Anything lower and I would be colliding with that bottom bracket. So we'll run through some measurements as well. Alright, so that's how it all loosely assembles. Obviously I didn't bolt anything together, I was only assembling it for the sake of the video. And the other little tip I would give you is to tie the wheel baskets at the top. If you can, tie them to the roof racks of your car. It kind of pulls the slack out of the hitch. By the time it's loaded up with bikes, it can wobble a little bit. And so those straps from the bike rack to the roof rack of your car is really going to make things really stable, and is going to remove any wobbling or anything like that. So I just want to jump into the measurements I've got, and then after that I'm going to just tell you what I wish I did differently, and hopefully when you build yours you can learn from my mistakes or my lessons, and yeah, maybe even build a better one than what I've built here. Alright guys, so the first piece to our puzzle is welding something like this to our hoop to support it. And you could either do this with the same material that you make the hoops out of and just do 2 braces. So I'll give you the lengths, I'll give you the angles, and then we'll knock it all up. You can adapt this how you need to, and then we'll move on to welding it to the rest of the frame. So it's 500 millimeters end to end. 125 millimeters from here to here, 50 millimeters across here, and I'll work out that angle for you. And that angle is 60 degrees or 30 degrees depending on which way you look at it. Now this hoop started out as a 1500 millimeter long piece of metal. It's 10 mil round, solid steel. These sections here are 100 mil wide. And then obviously you want to take your 1500 less 200, gives you 1300. Half of that is 650, so that's 650 to there. And half of that again is 325. And that's going to give you all your markings so you can bend this up and then weld the two ends together in the middle. Now I just have a right angle magnet here. Now it's important that your hoops are flat and relatively straight. You can bend them around a bit. If you need to twist them, put them in a vise. You can put a bar through the top here and twist. Give yourself some more leverage. And then once that's flat, we know this is going to be at a right angle to the hoop. Check our measurements, make sure it's centered. Yeah, if you have the same measurement at both ends, that's how you know it's in the middle. Now I have had a couple of bent ones here, but I just tack the two ends once I'm happy and then bend the middle to suit the rest of the bracket. Now one thing to note as well, you want to weld this bracket to where you've welded the join in the hoop. That way when you do weld them together, you're reinforcing that join in the hoop. Now this brace here is just a flat bit of steel. I've cut this to 145 millimeters long. Now at that length and at this height, when it touches the spreader bar here and when it touches the hoop at the top, it's automatically going to create a 30 degree and a 60 degree angle. So I just grab a bit of tape just to hold it there. We'll weld the bottom, then it won't move, and then we can weld the top. You can use a magnet as well just to hold it flush. Now we can take a measurement here and figure out the overall footprint, which is 195 millimeters. Now with that information, you can decide on how many bikes you want to carry, decide how wide you want your spreader bar to be, depending on how wide your car is. Just figure out even gaps in the room you have. In my instance, I've got 5 spots for a bike. The footprint's 195. Overall, I've got 1500, so then I can do some quick addition and subtraction, and I'll figure out how far apart each one is going to be. So my spacings are going to be 130, so I can measure out 130 millimeters, followed by 195, so on and so forth. So I just put a little X so I know that that's where the gap is. So I've got a gap, 195, gap, 195, gap, 195, gap, and then just double check that last measurement is 195. You may have to fudge it a bit, just make it work to the measurements you have. So this spreader bar, that's 1500 millimeters long. This hitch bar at the bottom is 450 millimeters long. Now this vertical bar is 1150, and like I said before, you could actually reduce that amount by 130 and still fit a full-size bike, and you still won't be clashing with the brackets at the top or at the bottom. Now we'll take a closer look at the bolts and the brackets and the elastics and where they connect to. So this is just paracord. It's like an elastic rope. It stretches, and I cut just a bunch of these into equal lengths, tied a simple knot at the end, and then you can hook it around the bar just like that. You go over your wheel, and then I've just got some metal roofing screws here, and you hook it over just like that. Now this piece is the backing plate for that spreader bar for the bottom wheels. Now I used a single piece of metal because I actually had some laying around. You could do this with 2 pieces of angle iron like I've done here. These are welded to the spreader. You could technically weld this. You could weld that to your vertical piece once it's in the right spot. It might make things a little simpler, but I like the fact that it's kind of adjustable. It can, you know, suit different bikes like road bikes or BMX bikes as well as mountain bikes. So these two edges are at a right angle with a funny little cutout at the bottom. Now You could simplify this just by making it a square. Now this measurement across the bottom is 260 mil and 230. We've got 20 mil from the bottom to the center of these holes. Now coming across from the side, we've got 90 mil, 160 mil, 230 mil to the center of the holes from the back edge. We're 75 mil up from the bottom. Now the measurement from that hole to all of these holes is 130 mil, because that there is a radius. That's what gives you the adjustment at a right angle or beyond or less than. Now, as I said earlier, this hole and this hole are at right angles in relation with these ones across the bottom. So as I said, they're 130 apart, and they're both going to be 40 mil off this back edge. And then it's up to you to decide how far you want the rest of the holes apart to give you that adjustment. But in my situation, they are 25 mil apart along that radius, starting from this bolt hole. So in the situation where you're trying to make this yourself, you've got your square plate of steel, you could pretty much come along here, cut that off, save a bit of weight. You might even be able to use that somewhere else. And you could technically cut this corner off the bottom, round your corners, and it would start resembling something a lot more like this. Now these cutouts are just there to save weight. So up to you how you approach it. Those are the measurements I had. And now we'll move on to the simpler parts. Now this piece is a lot simpler. I like to think of it as a straight piece through here, straight piece through the middle, and two triangles either side. So through here we've got 50 mil, and same at the bottom. Now these holes are in the center of that 50 mil, so that'll give you 25 from the top. Same through here. Now coming down from the top, we've got our 25 in from the edges, 50 mil and 50 mil, and up from the bottom, we've got 30 again down from this point, which would be 80 down from the top. Now the overall height, we've got 250, and just for some extra measurements across here, we have 165 to the end. And through here we've got 200 mil. Now that last piece there, you could do it with 2 bits of angle iron if you chose to. I used the square plate because I had it laying around. Now it's 150 by 150, and these holes are 25 mil in from both ends. Now one part I had trouble with was deciding where to drill the holes in this piece of metal so that this bracket will be in the right position to accept the vertical piece. Now we don't want the vertical piece in front, we want it on top. So that's how it all sits when it's finished. And if you do use these brackets, the confusing part is you've got all these bolt holes for adjustment. Now it's this bolt hole here that aligns at a right angle to the bottom piece. So you want to make sure these holes line up 25 mil in from the bottom. And once they line up, you can mark these 3 holes at the bottom and you'll be sure that everything ends up in the right spot. Now with these brackets, they could be smaller if you were to weld them. If you wanted to weld this whole thing together and keep it as one piece, you could use smaller brackets and you could get away with just 1 bracket as opposed to 2. But if you do like the whole bolt up setup, this is 8 mil thick, and I would say that's overkill. I reckon 6 mil would absolutely do it. Save on some weight there, because there is a bit of weight in these plates. And the same goes for this bottom plate for the hitch receiver. Now the bolts I used were to suit the thickness of the plates I had and how they were going to be used, and to suit the dimension of the box steel that I have. So I went with 50 by 50 everywhere because that's the size of the hitch piece, and obviously I used the bolts to suit. I think they're 100 mil long, which is absolutely plenty. You could probably get away with 75 mil, and the size of the bolt shank is 12 mil. So M12 bolts or 1/2 inch, whatever you want to use, they'll absolutely do the job. Now, some things I wish I did differently. First of all, the steel I used is too thick. It's heavy. I'm not gonna lie, it's heavy, it's strong, it's not gonna bend. But the only piece that really needs to be strong is your bottom piece. That's the piece that's got all the leverage on it, all the weight on it, once you have your vertical piece in here. So I would keep this with a 3 mil thickness sidewall, and the rest of the square tube I would do as a minimum thickness that you can get, which is probably going to be 1.6 mil. Now, other than using steel that was too thick and unintentionally making this too heavy, then definitely more heavy than it needed to be, that's the only thing I really wish I did differently. Other than that, I'm really happy with how it turned out. It did the job well, and what I did was I made 2 of these. I made 2 because me and 9 other friends were going mountain biking, so that way we could carry 10 pikes on 2 different cars and really minimize the amount of cars that we needed to get up and down the mountain. And if you are going to build one, building another one at the same time isn't going to be that much more difficult. The first one's always the hardest, and if you build 2, you can sell one of them and then you can make your money back on the materials. So I spent, I think, about $700 on materials. Thereabouts. You could definitely sell these for about $1,000 brand new, and so even if you made 2, sold 1, you could make $300 on top, and the second one that you've got cost you nothing. So I think that's a good way to approach it. Otherwise, just make one. It'll probably cost you $350. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. Don't be afraid to give welding a go. You can always buy a cheap welder secondhand. It doesn't have to be a TIG welder. A MIG welder or an arc welder will be just fine. This is a great project where you can learn welding, so don't feel like you can't make something. Invest your time in some tools, invest your money in some tools, and that way you can make things. And like I said, one of these will cost you $350. You could make 2, you could sell it, you could even make your money back on the welder. So give it a go. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more content like it, and we'll see you on the next one.